Hey family, welcome back to Courageous Motherhood. I just wrapped up a panel on colorism with a dynamic group of women, women of all shades, women of all backgrounds, and we were all sharing and discussing just the impact of colorism and how it has shown up in our life. And a lot of us were sharing different stories and different things. I just have my little notebook here that had my notes from the event. But regardless of what people might think of as similarities, meaning like similarities in skin tone or similarities just by being Black women. This particular panel was all women that identify as Black or African American. And one of the themes that came up was the impact of intergenerational conditioning, right? And I shared a little bit about how in our family, it was common knowledge that my grandmother would tell or had told my aunts and my uncles like that she didn't want them dating or marrying or having children with dark-skinned men because she didn't want them to produce dark-skinned children. And I don't even know that she explicitly said that. I think she just leaned more into the don't marry dark-skinned people and whatever, which is odd because both of her parents were very dark-skinned people. And she's from the South, but she's from the Jim Crow South. And so my grandmother was not dark-skinned. Both of my dark-skinned great-grandparents gave birth to a full spectrum of children, even though they were both dark-skinned. So they had the fair children with the light eyes, all the way to the brown, the different variations of brown, to the darker-skinned children. Within their 11 children that they had 10 children they had together, and then one more. And so the pain, the disrespect, the lynchings, the things that my grandmother saw in the Jim Crow South, a lot of those things were associated with the different ways that people were treated based upon their skin tone. Obviously, we know colorism exists in countries all over the world, and many different cultures, including, Indian cultures. They have the caste system, which is literally like, you are not going to get out of this particular place in society because of your skin tone. Like, if you're born into it, you're born into it. There is no educating your way out of your skin tone, any of that. So this is definitely something that people all over the world in different ways experience. But we were talking today about the African American experience. And so just thinking about what it does to the psyche of a child to be told that they should not value or procreate or whatever with a certain type of person one way or the other. And then most of my aunts, including my mother, went on to marry and have children with dark-skinned men. And so my grandfather is not dark-skinned, but he wasn't necessarily the best example of a man. And so I often wonder, like, was it rebellion against what my grandmother was saying, or was it just like not wanting to be with a man that they saw that wasn't, the healthiest, that was toxic? But this conversation, one of the other ladies there, I think her name is Dr. Tia, she was talking about how she was raised just with her parents and her brother. She didn't really have a lot of exposure to extended family, like aunts and uncles and cousins. And a lot of us had stories about how we witnessed cousins and different people being treated differently based upon their skin tone and color and all of that. And it was just such a powerful conversation as we all discussed, these moments that we became aware of colorism, or the impact of it, or for some people navigating corporate America and what that was like. For some of us, it started within families, seeing different cousins being treated differently, or maybe even more harshly based upon the color of their skin or the shade of the melanin in their skin. For me, also seeing that play out within friend groups, where it was just assumed that the light-skinned girls or the mixed girls get the first pick of the guys or whatever. And when you're young, it's like, whatever, nobody knows the rules. Life doesn't have rules. You just go along with it. But what that internalizes in you. And so in so many other spaces, business spaces, mentorship spaces, I have consistently, like I'm telling y'all, worth is an issue. Self-worth, self-security is such a profound, we are lacking profoundly in these areas of self-worth and self-security across the board. Now, I primarily or relatively exclusively work with women, but they're not just Black women. They are white, Latino, different backgrounds, but there's this issue of worth. And today I was just thinking, like, my God, how many of us have familial ways that we've been conditioned into poor self-worth, into insecurity? How many of us have just heard these phrases and didn't really think anything of it, and subconsciously our choices in a spouse or our choices and what we even pursued or thought that we could pursue or that we were worthy of pursuing was rooted in some of these just skewed and toxic is so overused, but these toxic perspectives. And so I remember on my journey personally as a mother, being exposed to some of the historical context of why these things happen and the impact that it has on your brain, and taking a pause and really looking at how that was impacting. At that point, I had one daughter, and I was just like, oh my God, like, I do not want to pass these things on to her. Like, what are my internal views? Where is it sitting with me? And that's been, a decades long journey, right? Because she's in her 20s at this point. But how grateful I am that growth can happen. One of the things I shared, which is something that my husband does say, is like, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And I think about just the oppression, the depression that I've experienced since a young child, the bullying, just the horrific self-worth and self-value that I saw all around me, right? Not just me, like I'm talking about, this is being modeled. It's being modeled to not value your body. It's being modeled to not value your time. Depression is normal. Like, we're all just supposed to be unhappy and complaining and grumpy. Like, this is just like a personality, right? That's normal, and it's an acceptable thing. And I just want to share, like, especially as a mother, like, mothers are so powerful. We hold such a powerful position when it comes to influencing the next generation or the next few generations. Parents in general, like, we have to get back to parenting, y'all. There are so many things on a subconscious level that we pass on to our children that we don't even know about. There are so many preconceived notions and trauma responses that we pass off as tradition. There are opportunities that we miss with ourselves, and then subsequently with our children and our grandchildren, just because of the work that we're afraid to do. And I just want to encourage anyone out there that's watching this, like, it is not how you start, it is how you finish. And I know for me, one of the pivotal things that happened for me was, in 2019, like, there's always these catalyst moments where you get to reflect, like, oh my God, this is not working, or, oh, this is working. I need to dig deeper into that. And there's these moments, I want to say this moment in terms of like the colorism and parenting and conditioning, that was maybe 2007. So then I started having meetings with my daughter, like getting feedback on my parenting. Hey, how are you experiencing me as a mom? What can I change? What can I shift? Now, some of the things that she shared were child things. I don't like it when you tell me to brush my teeth. Okay, yeah, that's a non-negotiable. But, oh, I don't like it when you yell, or, you know, these other responses like, yeah, why am I yelling? Like, am I yelling because it's the 5th time I've asked you to yell, or am I yelling as a bubbling over of the anger and frustration that I have within myself that actually has nothing to do with you? And the answers were different depending on, you know, different things. But just being able to sit down and have a conversation and ask my child that question was a totally different way of doing things according to how I was raised. And then maybe 2011 was another catalyst point. So that was maybe 2007, then 2011. I'm really struggling with postpartum depression in some real ways and seeking out everything imaginable. Like, I have to get myself back. Like, my body was all out of whack. My mind was out of whack. I was depressed in one of the most severe ways that I can't even really put words to it. Sunken place is the only phrase that will really do justice to what I was experiencing at that point for many different reasons. But making a decision where I was at that point and where my belief system was, that I was going to just dive into changing my brain and doing everything possible. So I joined this spiritual program and, you know, did this elimination diet, you know, no white flour, nothing white, no white sugar, no salt, no nothing, alkaline water, and like all these things, right, that were helpful on a physical level, but spiritually it led me down some other paths that were very scary and probably life-threatening. Could have been, felt like it was. And then moving forward, another catalytic time for me was finding out when I was pregnant with my son a few years later. And I had literally just been running for so many years and trying all these things, sitting in these ashrams, sitting in these temples, studying all these religions and pathways, and some of them felt good when they felt good for a moment, but none of them had lasting impact. And I just distinctly remember this moment where it just was like the Holy Spirit tapping me on my shoulder, like, are you done? You have literally tried all the things in this decade. You have done everything that you've wanted to do, but there's some residue that's just not getting, you know, chunked up. You're not healing. Like, I'm the only one that is going to get you through all these things that you're trying to put band-aids on. And it was really this moment of surrender. And that moment of surrender has turned into like another decade, I will say, because I was 2014, and it's been about another decade or so of really just this restorative thing. Like, everything doesn't happen at once. But in 2019, this was probably a bigger moment, getting divorced and being like, oh my God, like, I tried to do things the right way. I thought I was choosing things based upon this and based upon that. But then in that moment and in that season, I want to say 2019 to 2021, that's where there was like this deep-rooted breaking open that really just allowed the Holy Spirit to get in there and just like uproot all this stuff. What was the stuff that was being uprooted? It connects, just stay with me. Generational crap. When I say generational crap, I am talking about nasty, gooky, icky stuff that I was not even aware of. I had to dig deep into prayer and fasting. I had to dig deep into curiosity and being able to name the nastiness on my bloodline and seek repentance for it. I had to be okay with not being okay with all the things that I have done wrong, all the ways that I was conditioned, all the ways that I may have been hurtful to family members or to people that I love based upon this like familial conditioning, and, you know, getting these flashes of, you know, how I showed up as a child towards my cousins, how I showed up even in past relationships, how I was conditioned to think about men or think about marriage or think about parenting, all these things, and to be open to, number one, admitting that I was wrong and that I was hurtful, being willing to go back and apologize, being willing to actually hold people accountable, being willing to try to be brave, right? Because nobody, I'm telling you right now, when it comes time to, when you really start holding people accountable, child, they would rather leave your life. They would rather never speak to you. They would rather hop on the next train to wherever, to Mars, before they actually have humility and apologize. And that's just a reality. And then it's like, then you're assessing all of your connections, your friendships. What is at the root of this? Why am I connected to this person? Does this person align with, you know, my life? And it's not about people being perfect, right? But you do come to a point where you're like, oh, I was holding on to that friendship because I was just like, I have a level of idolatry connected to loyalty, right? Which means, it's interesting, but it's a little sidebar, where we're so loyal to a thing, a person, place, or a thing, just for the sake of loyalty, but not because it makes sense or that it is good for you or that it is fruitful. And so we keep people and attachments in our lives because of time. We might be afraid of confrontation. We might be afraid of discomfort. We might be afraid of whatever secrets that those people hold for us, or whatever the case may be. But really, like, digging into that and looking at that head on, it is hurtful. It is hard. Dare I say devastating, depending on what it is that is being brought up. But it's necessary soul work, you know? And so as we were talking today just about these different points as it relates to colorism within our particular community, it's just like, man, it's not easy having these conversations and doing the work. It's not easy looking at our loved ones, and acknowledging ways that even though we love them and they were amazing, and I'm talking about maybe elders, you know, like your grandparents, your parents, whoever, as we're healing and digging through all of that, to be able to say like, wow, I was actually taught some really harmful things. There were some perspectives here that were just not cool. And it doesn't matter how much that person loved me, or, you know, the next thing, sometimes you have to call a spade a spade. And then it's also like, but how am I going to be different? How am I going to be better? How am I going to unlearn this for myself, recondition my mind and my perspective, and then teach the new way to the next generation, or go back and say, hey, I may have taught you this, son or daughter, and that wasn't right, and I apologize, you know? And so I just want to encourage you, like, even if you feel like it's too late for you, you got it wrong, your children are always grown, like, it's okay. And it is so impactful to have humility and be able to go back and just have these conversations with your children, with your loved ones, and in love, just be able to be like, yo, like, I'm sorry that this is a perspective that I had that may have negatively influenced you. Or I acknowledge how the impact of these societal and familial ways of conditioning, in this case, maybe around color, maybe I did make you feel as loved as you could have. Maybe I said a phrase. One of the ladies was talking about her coily hair being called B2Bs outside of her home when she was interacting with people at school. And I know that that's a phrasing that was very common in my family growing up, with people that had kinkier or coilier hair. And then kind of watching the doting and the preference be for those of us that had wavier hair or lighter skin or things like that. And it was never explicitly said like, oh, I like you better because of this, or I'm treating you nicer because of this, but it was shown in actions. Seeing your darker skinned cousins be more harshly disciplined, you know, seeing the cousin with the light eyes just have to go like this, and then, oh, it's okay. And they've done the same thing that this other one just maybe got hit with a shoe, a slipper or something for the same thing, but they don't have the light eyes and the light skin to get out of it, right? It's wild. But what does that do to all of us? No matter what side we're on, what does that do to us? And just being grateful personally for redemption and restoration and bravery, because this path, it's not easy. And so many of us, and all, you know, everyone had a story, no matter if they were on the lighter side, light skin, brown skin, or dark skin. Like, everyone had these perspectives where there's just so much harm that's been done within our families and within us interacting in society. And it's just like, wow, even when we have a certain level of privilege, even when we have a certain level of people preferring us for whatever reason, you know, we all have these moments where harm has taken place, you know. What do they call it? Pretty privilege. Pretty privilege isn't always a privilege. Sometimes people that have been pretty or whatever as young children, maybe that drew abusers towards them, right? And you're like, oh, you never experienced anything because you're pretty and everybody like, you don't know, maybe that person was abused because of their appeal or whatever. You know, people are sick and they do things for really weird, disgusting reasons, but the point is just understanding that we all have stories, and that if we're brave enough, we can take those stories and shift the perspective of how we are raising and interacting with the next generation. And just like, at least in my life, how God has renewed my mind, like the way that I think, the way that I process, like I'm growing consistently in patience, and in empathy. And I'm certainly not where I need to be, but understanding like the extremely low tolerance person that I was like 25, 30 years ago, and how I saw nothing wrong with it because it was modeled before me as like a personality trait to just be like, you know, sarcastic and quick-tempered or whatever the case may be. And then to see all of the path that I've followed and how God has restored me like back and getting closer and closer back to like my original personality, how I was created to be, and to just create boundaries with people that cannot honor that. It's such a beautiful place to be, and it's such a place that I want for everyone. But I heard so much pain, and I heard so much opportunity. And I know that as mothers, like in everyone's story, mothers were the like the anchor there. Like, we have the power to build up a solid, secure, well-loved next generation. We just have to be brave enough to do the work for ourselves so that we can encourage and love and pour into the next generation in a way that they don't have to walk around with the brokenness that we've experienced. And if they do, and when they interact with the world, that they have a safe and solid and loving place to come when the world, you know, knocks them over the head and tries to make them feel like they're nothing. So I just want to encourage you, even if you're a mom and you feel like you haven't started off on the right path, how you start does not have to be how you finish. Finish well. Do the work. Talk to you guys soon.